Hello, guys, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 6, Falling Action with Reilly Smith.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Inked Podcast. I am Genesis Duran, and I am popping in as your host for this episode of the podcast. And today we are diving into Falling Action, our next step on the road of plot. Here to help me today is Miss Reilly Smith. How are you today?
Girl, breathe. That was like, I love the energy. I'm here for it, but just please breathe.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're okay. Well, I am doing good today. I am very excited to be guesting on the podcast again. So, yeah. Thank you, obviously, Genesis, for hosting today.
Of course, I am always willing to lend a hand. Riley, as always, needs no introduction because she has been around the Inked podcast a lot. She is best known as the regular host and director, but today she is stepping in to guest for this episode because we had complications with our original guest. So, without further delay, are you ready to start with the questions?
I'm pumped and ready to go. Yeah.
All right. Well, our first question is, what is the falling action?
So, the falling action, in my own words, is essentially that there's so many ways to describe it, but to me I always think of it as like the sigh. So like in your life when something big happens and you've got something big, as soon as it's like settled, you just you're like, okay, it's done, I can breathe again type thing. So your falling action is just that like moment after your
Yeah,
climax. It's just your breathing room and your chance to finally like let everything start falling back into place.
makes sense. It's like kind of like there's so much tension that has happened that it's just like all that is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I can relax.
Yeah.
So their next question would be like, how fast should it happen? Should it be like slow, or how
So
fast should this falling action happen?
personally, I think that it depends wholly on the story because maybe you have a really fast, action packed type story and you want your falling action to be the opposite of that. You kind of want your falling action to be a sigh and you want it to be that calm, like after the storm kind of moment. So maybe there's some fluff in there. Maybe there's some like relaxed scenes, some relaxed things going on. And it's just that absolute like breath of fresh air for your characters over like your exposition, rising action, turning point, climax, turning point, like all of that. It seems to happen a lot faster. But like I normally prefer to do a slower falling action, but like maybe you've had a really slow story this entire time and then it's
Mm-hmm.
sped up on that second half with your climax, your second turning point, and your falling action into your resolution. um so yeah, so I would say it depends on the story. So most of the time I would say keep it slow, keep it calm, because it is that moment after your climax where your reader has just been on the edge of their seat in like a total state of tension and in a total state of probably having anxiety at 12 a.m. when they're up reading the story to into this like calmer, more chill kind of flow of the story. So I would just say give them breathing room. So pace it how you
Mm-hmm.
think your readers would want it. If it's been a slow story, maybe think, okay, maybe they want it a little faster, or maybe they want it to stay slow. Just think about your key audience as well as the story itself.
And I know this isn't in like the questions for the script, but like for the example of how should that pace look like? Could you give like an example so that someone could understand? Because for me, like what you're saying, like fast. What if you have a fast action packed and then you go into like a slow thing? Do you have like examples of how that might look like?
So yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of like if there's one from like a more popular work of fiction over just one from one of my stories, but I will say that there's definitely a good example of it. Okay, I've thought of one from my stories. A good example of it is I have a story that's the first book in my Amulets of Averon, and at the end of the story, after like this grand climax, it's like this whole story has been really fast paced because like exposition, rising action, all of that has already happened, and my character has just been through like this big traumatic war, but he's finally getting to go home. And so going from that, this is an example of the fast to slow pace. um it's he, okay, I'm trying not to over explain it too much, but like, and not also without giving like spoilers to the book because I'd prefer some people still be surprised. But he goes from this big fight, and the very next chapter, he's on the train on his way home. So like he's injured in this chapter before, and then he's on his way home in the next chapter. And then you just kind of get like this whole, he has this whole scene with his best friend on their way home, with like them both breathing for the first time, and like, okay, we're out of war now, we're safe, like we're on our way home. And then as soon as he gets home, he gets off the train and gets to like embrace his family. And so like all of that, I feel like I over explained more to like, or put into greater detail, that feeling of finally getting a breath, just because it's kind of a cue to the reader that okay, now you can take a breath too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's a very, very good example of falling action because it kind of also sounds bittersweet
Mm-hmm.
because it's like all this stuff that has been like trauma for this character happens and then you get to the end where it's like finally it's over.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in the Lord of the Rings where
Oh
Frodo's
yes,
just like it's over.
that's a good example. I should have used that, but that's good. That's a good example too. Is the Lord of the Rings, and like
Yeah.
they were saved, and then they went home, and like it was just the absolute breath of fresh air type situation.
Mhm. And it was very bittersweet. I think I like personally I like bittersweet
Oh yeah, for
endings
sure.
because I know there's like, oh, you can get a happy ending, like you kind of want a happy ending to
Hmm.
happen, but I prefer bittersweet ones because it leaves you like I wish there was more. I wish there like something better could have happened or like
I feel
something
like
like worse. Maybe you say worse,
I feel like
but
with bittersweet endings, they're almost more realistic because you
mhm.
realize that those feelings will be there, and that, like it will be like this breath of fresh air, but then there's also like this phase of your life is ending. That's how I feel right
Mhm.
now. I'm about to graduate high school. I graduate high school next year, and that's kind of how I'm feeling. I feel like I'm in like the climax right now, and
Mhm.
everything's going crazy, and then as soon as that's done, I'm going to be like breath of fresh air. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm definitely identifying with those bittersweet endings right now.
So, how long should this falling action be? We've talked about the pacing. We talked about how fast it should happen. About how long do you think falling action should be?
So it's totally up to you. You can be like, I think I said this in our episode about rising action, but just remember in that scene that you can give so much fluff, but it's about finding that balance with the fluff. So like rising action and falling action are like those moments of fluff, and like a lot of times those moments of foreshadowing too. And so
Mm-hmm.
definitely make sure that you're getting a good amount of fluff in there, but that your fluff is like not boring. So like make sure that it's
Yeah.
not extended really long. Like I said, my biggest fluff scene in one of my in the first Amulets of Averon book is that scene with his best friend in the train. Or it's not a
Mm.
train, but you guys don't know that yet. So we're gonna keep that to myself right
That'll be
now.
a secret. All right, keep your
Look, I'm
secrets.
keeping the I don't want to reveal everything about these books. I want people to still be able to read them and then be a surprise. Um
No, makes sense. Makes
but
sense.
yeah, it's like that whole, it's realizing how much fluff you want there to be. So like
Mm.
I've read some books that are like info dumpy type falling actions, and those are like my
Yeah.
least favorite ones. I want I pretty much want everything to be like cleaned up and like everything within the climax and the turning point. Like I want all of the epic big things to have happened in that. I don't want it to happen in the
Mhm.
falling action. So like if the falling action is just a bunch of info dumping because like you didn't talk about it
Yep.
in the climax and the turning point, then that's gonna be really long and really boring. Which I read a book recently, is Fearless by Lauren Roberts, and I love Lauren Roberts. Do not get me wrong, but the end of that book, the falling action of that was a little bit info dumpy, and I was like, no, I know you can do so much better than this. Like
Yeah.
it just,
I think that's very irritating when authors that you know that they can write a
mm-hmm.
good book, but then you pick up like the next book in the series and then it's like, really, you could have done
Yeah,
this better. It just feels like it almost feels like they rushed to get the book
yeah,
out. And so you kind of wonder like, hey, why didn't you guys
yeah.
point this out
Like
in a
that's
way?
my biggest thing as an author. I'm like, if I am not, like if my readers are like, okay, I feel like this was rushed, I feel like it was info dumpy or like whatever, like, and I get that feedback from them, or like I normally give it to like beta readers and alpha readers first, obviously, and if I get that back from
Mhm.
them, I want to know, because I don't want my readers to have to go through that. I don't want them to be like, oh, she can do better, because I know I can do better.
Mhm.
Like at this point,
Yep.
I've fought myself. I know I
So,
can do better.
yeah. Um we talked about all this stuff of falling action, but do you have to have a falling action or can you just like not have it at
So
all?
I think it's possible to not have a falling action, but again, like I said earlier, to me it's so important to have one because you get to have that breath of fresh air and that like total just, if there are loose ends that you have to tie up within that, you can like tie them up, not info dumping type tie them up, but like if you have like this character is like longing for something that they didn't get in the climax or the turning point, then you can give that to them in the falling action. So I think that you can have a story without one because you just go straight from your turning point where things start to get better to your like resolution. But I think that you should decide whether you want to have one or not. I personally will suggest that you do have one because A, it'll make your story
Mhm.
longer, B, it'll give them, as in your readers and your characters, a breath of fresh air, and then you're just kind of, I use that analogy a lot, don't I? Like the breath of fresh air and the like complete sigh, but that's the best way to
Mhm.
describe it. So yeah,
I think
I
so.
definitely think it's possible.
So you mentioned that about tying up loose ends. Could you expand a little bit about that? How can you use the falling action to actually tie up those
So,
loose
a lot
ends?
of the time in stories, there are questions that we intentionally leave the readers with. And my biggest thing is normally in the falling action, you can tie up those more morally like based questions. So like if your character is having a doubt about themselves and then they fight this big battle and they make this big decision in your climax and your turning point, then they can kind of probably like start to understand their own abilities type thing. So like if
Yeah.
it's a character flaw type situation or like a character doubt type situation, you can definitely use a falling action to fix that by them having like a realization or like seeing or reflecting. I like to have my characters reflect a lot. Where they like reflect on everything that's just happened in the climax and the turning point, and they're like coming to the realization of this thing. I have a character who's a prime example of this. I'm not going to tell you too much about him. Again, he's not from the Amulets of Avalon. He's from a short story I'm writing, um, that I don't even know if it'll be published. I might publish it one day, but um, essentially he goes through this entire story with this big like I've been hurt, so I want to hurt others type thing. And at the end of the
I
story,
see.
after he sees someone who has been hurt so greatly and like who still yearns to help and heal others, he finally like makes that decision, okay, I want to help and heal others. And that's the turning point. And then he actually has this huge like physical transformation because he goes from this, oh, I don't want to say too much about it, but he goes
No, don't say
He
don't.
goes
Don't
from,
say too
let's
much.
just
Don't
say,
say too
he goes
much.
from this like big fearsome beast to like this person that he is on the inside. That's what we'll say. That's what we'll say then.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay,
Moving
don't
on.
don't say no more. Don't say no more. Moving on. This is the last question that we have here. But can you tell us a little bit about plot twists in the falling action? Is it possible to have plot twists in the falling action? And could you give examples for the people that are listening? Like maybe they're confused of how
Okay.
that may look like in
So
the falling
I
action.
personally don't advise having plot twists in the falling action. I normally advise having them earlier than that and like the turning point and like the second turning point in your story. Um, but there is again that opportunity to have them there. And I will say don't probably put them there. I will say probably save them and put them in your resolution for like your cliffhanger effect. I don't have a ton of great. Oh, I actually do. Um, so I have an event that happens in every Amulets of Acheron book, and
Oh, here we go.
okay, look,
Another
this
example from
is
your
like
story.
these
I'm
are like
joking.
I am so proud of these stories because I put so many elements into all of them and they are based off the first book I ever wrote. So like as I'm writing them, I'm seeing my past self combined with my future self in writing, or not my future self, with my current self combined into like these stories, and they are I love them. Okay, moving on. Um but like in the falling action of all of those stories, things are like tying up at the end, but like the at like the basis, not the end of that story, but at like there's a moment in all of those stories where each character has left something. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but each character has left something, and it leaves the reader with a plot twist and a question all at the same time. And so definitely you can have them
Mm,
in your falling action, but I don't always advise it
yeah.
just because it's a little more complicated to have them there, because then your readers read that and they're like, why didn't you say something about that in the end? Like, why didn't this get tied up in the end? Because
Yeah.
there's going to be another book.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like the way to get you to talk about your stories and possibly get spoilers is just to interview for
That's valid.
writing
That is very
purposes.
valid.
Well, it has been so much fun hosting this episode, and now it's time for me to hand back the
All
reins
right.
to
Well,
Miss
thank you,
Riley.
Genesis, so much for being here and hosting today. It was an honor to have you introduce me and get many secrets out of me that I wasn't supposed to share. And as
Yes.
always, thank you to our listeners for being here, and we will see you in our next episode. Bye, guys.